Thank you for joining your desert frontiersman Alan for more Southwest lost gold and treasure tales. Please leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe. For further desert tales, hit the notification bell. If you would like to help support my time and channel, hit the super thanks heart icon at the bottom of the video and contribute. This is very helpful. Relax and enjoy. Welcome to Southwest Desert, where we explore the fascinating tales of the American Southwest. Today, we're diving deep into an extraordinary story of gold, survival, and mystery in one of California's most forbidding landscapes, the tale of the Lost Shotgun Mine. Our story begins in the harsh expanse of the Sheephole Mountains, a rugged range that rises from the California desert between 29 Palms and Amboy. But to truly understand the mystery of the Lost Shotgun Mine, we must first understand these mountains themselves, a landscape so challenging that it kept all but the most determined prospectors at bay. The Sheephole Range is a study in isolation and extremes. These mountains stand as a natural fortress, surrounded on all sides by an unforgiving desert that creates what old-timers described as a tight, hot wasteland. Travel through this terrain is treacherous, with the mountains themselves presenting a formidable challenge to anyone daring to explore their secrets. In this forbidding landscape, water, the lifeblood of any desert traveler, is incredibly scarce. Throughout the entire mountain range, there exists only one absolutely reliable water source: the spring at the Sheephole Mine, situated at the extreme end of the range near the pass above Dale Dry Lake. While some old mine shafts and tunnels do collect precious water, and there's a serviceable well in the bottom of a large dry wash, these sources offer little comfort to those venturing east through the mountains, where water simply ceases to exist. This scarcity of water was so severe that most experienced prospectors of the era simply chose to avoid the area altogether. The risk of death by thirst was too real, too present, to justify the potential rewards. But as with all tales of frontier prospecting, there are always those who see opportunity where others see only danger. Enter L.O.L, a prospector whose story might have been lost to time if not for a remarkable discovery in an El Dorado, California attic. This discovery came decades later during a routine house remodeling project, when workers uncovered an old tin trunk tucked away in a forgotten corner, thick with the dust of passing years. The house itself had long since passed from its original owners to a new resident in Placerville. This new owner, knowing nothing of the trunk's history or contents, gave permission for it to be examined, a decision that would unlock a decades-old mystery of the sheepholes. Inside this weathered chest lay a collection of yellowed letters that painted a vivid picture of life, death, and gold in the unforgiving desert of the 1870s. These weren't random correspondence. They were the written exchanges between two mining partners, L.O.L and John Cartwright, who had originally worked together on the placer grounds along the Cosumnes River, south and west of El Dorado. The letters reveal that by 1871, Cartwright had relocated to Fresno, while Long had set his sights on new territory, the forbidding Sheephole Mountains. Through their correspondence, we get a stark picture of just how dangerous this region was in the 1870s. The letters speak of multiple tragedies: a miner who died of thirst while attempting to journey from Dale to Amboy, his body found on the north slope of the Sheep Mountains. Another unfortunate soul perished in the Pinto Basin while trying to reach Cottonwood Springs. In those days, even with today's settlements, the country was sparsely populated and incredibly dangerous. But among these cautionary tales, Long's letters contained something extraordinary, something that made all the risks worthwhile. He had discovered rich placer ground, approximately 15 miles due east of what he called the Salt Lake, what we now know as Dale Dry Lake. Near his claim, he had found a small spring which he carefully improved by digging it out and adding stone walls. This wasn't just any water source. It was a reliable oasis that attracted both quail and mountain sheep, a telling sign of its dependability in this harsh landscape. The letters themselves tell us something about Long as a person. His handwriting and simple expressions suggest he wasn't highly educated. He was clearly a man who let action speak louder than words, making his way through some of the most challenging terrain in the Southwest, apparently on foot, as no mention is ever made of a burro or any other pack animal. The most revealing document in this collection was a letter dated June 1873, posted from San Bernardino. This letter stood out dramatically from the others, written in proper English and clearly dictated to someone more educated, perhaps a doctor or friend. In this final communication, Long revealed something extraordinary. He had managed to extract 100 ounces of gold from his workings, a remarkable achievement for a lone prospector in such harsh conditions. While the letter doesn't specify his exact methods, experienced miners suggest he likely used a hand washer or bib, washing out the gold by pan at his improved spring after blowing away the lighter material. This method, while labor-intensive, would have been practical for a solitary miner working in an area with limited water resources. But this letter wasn't just a record of success. It was also Long's final testament. He had suffered a serious fall, injuring both his leg and side. The letter recounts how two prospectors found him wandering near Dale Dry Lake, but not before the harsh desert had extracted its toll. In his weakened state, Long had been forced to make a crucial decision. He cached his shotgun among the rocks, no longer able to bear its weight. This decision would later give the lost mine its name, but at the time, it was simply a matter of survival. Long's water supply had run dry, made worse by the fever from his injuries, and he was near death when found. Though he managed to make it to San Bernardino, the combination of his injuries and the grueling journey proved too much. A letter from the San Bernardino marshal to Cartwright, dated June 22, 1873, carried the final chapter of Long's story, inquiring about arrangements for his burial. But the story doesn't end with Long's death. In 1925, over 50 years after Long's final journey, a remarkable discovery added a new chapter to the mystery. Phil Sullivan, an old-time miner from 29 Palms who knew these mountains well, made an unusual find, a fine English shotgun and several shells, hidden under a rock ledge approximately 10 miles east of Dale Lake. Sullivan, who had spent considerable time prospecting these mountains, was puzzled by the discovery. As he later recounted, it made little sense for someone to leave such a valuable weapon in an area so far from both water and game. When asked about springs in the area, Sullivan, despite his extensive experience in these mountains, couldn't recall ever seeing one in those hills. Phil Sullivan's own connection to the sheepholes adds another layer to this story. When asked where he would prospect if he were young again, Sullivan, who used to spend hours sharing stories at the local shop, always said he would head straight for the sheepholes. While he never mentioned the lost mine story directly, his interest in the area suggests he might have known more than he revealed. Yet another intriguing piece of the puzzle emerged through Heine Olson of 29 Palms, who shared a story about a military pilot stationed at the local army field. This pilot had spotted something unusual during one of his flights, a brush-choked canyon hidden deep in the sheepholes. Plans were made to have pilots help locate this canyon from the ground, but like so many aspects of this story, these plans never materialized. The mystery of the lost shotgun mine persists to this day. Somewhere in those unforgiving mountains, perhaps in that brush-filled canyon near a long-forgotten spring, lies the rich placer ground that L.O.L worked nearly 150 years ago. The gold he found, 100 ounces, stands as testament to the potential wealth still hidden in those hills. But the same dangers that claimed Long's life remain: the merciless sun, the scarce water, and the treacherous terrain. The questions continue to intrigue modern explorers. Was the shotgun Phil Sullivan discovered in 1925 the same one Long was forced to abandon in his desperate journey? Does the brush-choked canyon spotted from the air conceal the entrance to the lost mine? And somewhere in those mountains, does Long's improved spring still exist, providing life-giving water to desert wildlife as it did in the 1870s? The Sheephole Mountains keep their secrets well, challenging modern explorers just as they challenged L.O.L nearly 150 years ago. The mountains remain much as they were in Long's time: isolated, forbidding, and mysterious, where water is still as precious as gold, and where the next ridge might hide a fortune or disaster. This has been Southwest Desert. Join us next time as we explore another tale of hidden treasures and forgotten histories in the vast American desert. In the rugged terrain of the American Southwest, where desert meets mountain and ancient stories whisper through canyon walls, there lies a mystery that has tantalized treasure hunters for generations. Deep in the Santa Catalina Mountains near Tucson, Arizona, hidden somewhere among its weathered peaks and shadowed valleys, is a legendary mine sealed behind an iron door, a mine so rich in gold that its story has passed from historical fact into the realm of legend. This is the tale of the Lost Escalante Mine, also known as the Mine with the Iron Door. Our story begins not in the very distant past, but with an unexpected discovery in the 1950s. Two employees of Montan Air Base near Tucson were hiking in the Santa Catalina Mountains when they stumbled upon something extraordinary: the rusted remnants of an ancient Spanish forge. At first they saw it as merely an interesting relic of the conquistador era in the Southwest. But this wasn't just any forge. Upon closer inspection, they found it bore the distinctive mark of Madrid, Spain, and carried the date 1757. These men, more familiar with modern machinery than mining history, knew nothing of the Lost Escalante Mine, made famous by Harold Bell Wright in his novel The Mine with the Iron Door. They couldn't have known that their chance discovery might be the key to unlocking one of the Southwest's most enduring mysteries. To understand the true significance of their find, we must journey back to the 18th century, to a time when Jesuit priests wielded both spiritual and temporal power throughout the Spanish territories. Among these men of the cloth was Father Silvestre Vélez de Escalante, a figure whose name would become inextricably linked with one of the Southwest's greatest lost treasures. Father Escalante served as assistant to the renowned Father Eusebio Kino at Mission San Xavier del Bac near Tucson. The mission still stands today, its white walls rising from the desert like a Spanish galleon sailing on a sea of sand. But our story takes us away from the mission sanctuary and into the wild mountains that beckon to men of ambition and faith alike. The Jesuits of that era had a divine mission: to spread the gospel among the plains, Native Americans, and the wild pagan tribes of the northern hills. As they would say, they were storing up treasures in heaven. But these practical men of God weren't above storing up some earthly treasures as well, and this is where our story takes a fascinating turn. High in the Santa Catalina Mountains, Father Escalante had discovered something remarkable: a gold deposit of extraordinary richness. The mine that would later bear his name was soon in full operation. Indigenous workers, primarily from the Papago tribe, labored in the tunnels, extracting precious ore that was then processed in primitive grinding mills along the banks of the Canada del Oro. The relationship between the Jesuits and their indigenous workers was complex. While the priests' primary occupation was spiritual in nature, their treatment of the neophytes under their charge occasionally caused tension. The sound of grinding ore mixed with the chants of prayer, as gold and faith became increasingly intertwined in this remote corner of New Spain. By 1767, the Escalante mine was at its peak of production. Gold was flowing from the mountains like water, but dark clouds were gathered on the horizon. In that fateful year, Spanish King Charles III issued an edict that would change everything: the complete expulsion of the Jesuit order from Spain and all her possessions. The Jesuits didn't accept this decree quietly. For months, they fought against the expulsion order while continuing their mining operations. Gold continued to flow from the mine as they battled the inevitable. But these shrewd men could read the signs of the times. Knowing they might not be able to take their accumulated wealth with them when they left, they began to devise a plan. According to Spanish records preserved by Tucson citizens and Papago legends passed down through generations, the priests employed a large number of indigenous workers to construct a secret vault. This wasn't just a simple hiding place. It was a carefully planned treasure house, built not at the mine itself, but near the south bank of the Canada del Oro, close to their mining camp and chapel. The evidence of this operation remains visible today for those who know where to look. The ruins of the old camp still stand, silent sentinels to the events that transpired there. Near these ruins, one can find the remains of the grinding mills where countless tons of gold ore were processed, and the foundations of a small chapel where the priests once said Mass, their prayers echoing off the canyon walls. But fate had one final cruel twist in store. In June of 1769, while the Native American miners and their families were celebrating San Juan's Day, disaster struck without warning. A large band of Apache warriors descending from the surrounding hills like a summer storm launched a devastating raid. The attack was swift and merciless. Many Papago were killed, the mission was nearly destroyed, and the careful organization of the mining operation was shattered in a single day of violence. In the bloody aftermath of the attack, the mines were abandoned. Many priests from outlying missions lost their lives before they could reach the ships waiting to carry them to exile. The location of both the mine and the treasure vault was lost to time, hidden by the natural processes of erosion and the deliberate efforts of those who sought to protect their secrets. But stories and clues remained, passed down through generations. An old Mexican merchant who ran a modest grocery store on North 6th Avenue in Tucson, just north of the present underpass, once possessed an intriguing document, a faded waybill that supposedly contained directions to the Escalante mine. According to this yellowed piece of paper, the mine lay about 1 league northwest of a distinctive natural formation called the Ventana, a window-like hole in the rock face. From the mine's entrance, workers could look southeast and see straight through this natural window, a detail that suggests the mine's location was chosen with both practical and symbolic significance. Perhaps the most tantalizing account comes from an Indian vaquero known only as Old Steve, who rode the Santa Catalina Range for many years. One windy day, as he made his way along a familiar trail, his attention was caught by an unusual sound, an eerie moaning coming from a patch of brush near the trail. Following the sound, he discovered its source: wind blowing across a small hole in the side of a high ridge. What Old Steve found was far more than a simple cave. It was a large tunnel with areas stopped almost to the surface, clear evidence of extensive mining operations. Inside lay piles of broken ore, still waiting after all these years to be transported down to the grinding mills. The walls and ceiling were home to massive clusters of bats, their wings creating whispers in the darkness. Though Old Steve spoke freely about his discovery to his Native American and Mexican friends, he took the exact location to his grave, adding another layer of mystery to the legend. The evidence of this lost mine continues to tantalize treasure hunters and historians alike. Each year, when the summer rains pound the Catalinas, bright yellow gold washes down from the hillsides into the Canada del Oro, where it settles to bedrock, a gilded reminder of the riches that still lie hidden in these mountains. Every evening from April to late October, millions of bats emerge from forgotten mountain tunnels and stopes, perhaps including the very mine that old Steve discovered, their nightly exodus a living clue to the mine's location. And with the discovery of that old Spanish forge high on a windswept ridge, there is added another piece of this historical puzzle. Could these clues, the forge dating back to 1757, the nightly emergence of the bats, the continuing presence of placer gold in the Canada del Oro, finally lead someone to rediscover the fabulously rich mine with the iron door? And what of the Jesuits' lost treasure house on the banks of the Canada del Oro? The Santa Catalina Mountains keep their secrets well, but somewhere in those rugged peaks, behind an iron door or hidden in a long-forgotten vault, the treasures of Father Escalante may still be waiting to be found. The gold that once flowed from these mountains like water now lies hidden, protected by time, nature, and perhaps something more. The deliberate efforts of those who sought to preserve their wealth until they could return to claim it. The story of the mine with the iron door is more than just a tale of lost treasure. It's a window into a pivotal moment in southwestern history, when the ambitions of Spanish missionaries collided with royal politics and the harsh realities of frontier life. It's a story of the complex relationships between European settlers and indigenous peoples, of trust and betrayal, of wealth both spiritual and material. As the sun sets over the Santa Catalinas, casting long shadows across the Canada del Oro, one can't help but wonder, will someone someday stumble upon that iron door or find that hidden vault of Jesuit gold? Or will the mountains keep their secrets forever, letting only tiny grains of gold wash down with each summer rain, teasing us with possibilities of what lies hidden in those rocky heights? I hope you enjoyed this lost treasure tale. Welcome to Tales of the Southwest Desert, where we explore the fascinating stories that shape the frontier. Today, we're diving into an extraordinary tale from the Mojave Desert, a story of lost gold, a mysterious German prospector, and a rifle that stood as a silent sentinel in the desert sand for half a century. Our story unfolds in the vast expanse of the Mojave Desert, where the Lazy M cattle ranch once stood near the mouth of Red Rock Canyon, approximately 20 miles north of Mojave, California. This was the home of the Muncie family. Rhoda, a remarkable widow, and her son Will, who would become crucial players in uncovering one of the desert's most intriguing mysteries. But to understand their discovery, we need to travel back to 1867, when a German prospector known only as Gooler made his way south from the unforgiving terrain of Death Valley. Neither his first name nor his initials were ever recorded in the annals of history, but his story would become legendary in Kern County. Picture, if you will, a weary traveler making his way through a small canyon, approximately 40 miles north of what would later become the town of Mojave. The canyon lay on the west side of the valley, and Gooler, exhausted from his journey, stopped at a spring to quench his thirst. As he knelt down to drink, the glint of something in the crystal-clear water caught his experienced prospector's eye, gold nuggets lying there as if waiting for discovery. But this promising discovery came with immediate challenges. Gooler found himself in unfamiliar territory, and the threat of hostile Native Americans made every moment precious. He conducted a hasty survey of the immediate surroundings, knowing he needed to move quickly but also desperate to ensure he could find this spot again. In what would prove to be a fateful decision, Gooler decided to attempt a shortcut to Los Angeles. Instead of following the old road that ran along the Sierra Nevada spur to the west of the valley, the safe, known route, he chose to cut across the valley to the east. The mountains here ran northeasterly, adding to his confusion in this unfamiliar landscape. Wanting to travel light and fast, but knowing he needed some way to mark this precious location, Gooler made a decision that would echo through decades of desert history. He climbed to the top of a small hill near the eastern side of the valley and carefully created a rough sketch of the ridge he had passed when entering the valley from the west. His crude map showed the small canyon where he'd found the gold, but he knew a map alone might not be enough. Then came the moment that would spawn 50 years of speculation and searching. Gooler took his Spencer repeating rifle, a reliable weapon manufactured in Boston around 1860, and planted it upright in the desert sand. The gun contained 1 cartridge in the chamber and 3 in the magazine, a detail that would later prove crucial in confirming its identity. This would be his marker, his key to returning to the fortune that lay waiting at the spring. The journey to Los Angeles was long and arduous, taking many days. Along the way, Gooler stopped at Elizabeth Lake, where he showed his nuggets to a German man named Hefner, who ran the stage station there. This would be the first of many attempts to convince others of his incredible find. When he finally reached Los Angeles, the streets were teeming with miners who had come down from the legendary Kern River country. Most met Gooler's tale with skepticism, having heard too many stories of fabulous strikes that proved worthless. But fate had a plan, and it came in the form of a chance meeting with a man named Grant Price Cuddeback. Their meeting reads like a scene from a dime novel. Gooler, noticing Cuddeback's possibly German surname, approached him with his story. "My name is Gooler," he began, speaking with his thick German accent. "And I hear der men call you Cuddeback-Veach. I say maybe good German name too. Will you look at my gold, Mr. Cuddeback? It is so good nobody will believe me when I say I find it." Cuddeback was no ordinary prospective partner. Historical accounts describe him as a man of hazardous adventures, someone who had already made the transition from mining to agriculture, but still held a prospector's dream in his heart. When Gooler showed him the nuggets and explained how he'd found them, Cuddeback's experienced eye recognized their authenticity. What followed were 3 ambitious expeditions that would test both men's determination. The first expedition took them as far as Willow Springs, approximately 50 miles short of their goal. They prospected numerous small canyons to the west, but found nothing. As days passed without success, the other members of their party began to grow distrustful of Gooler. Tensions mounted until Cuddeback, demonstrating the leadership qualities that made him successful, decided to lead the group back to Los Angeles before the situation deteriorated further. The second expedition reached Muroc Dry Lake, still 40 miles away from where Gooler's gun stood waiting in the desert sun. Again, they searched in vain, and again they were forced to return empty-handed. But Gooler's conviction never wavered. The third expedition finally brought success, though not quite in the way they'd hoped. The party made their way to the west side of the valley north of Mojave and into Red Rock Canyon. Here, they struck gold, though, ironically, this location was about 15 miles southwest of where Gooler had made his original discovery. The partners worked these diggings for several years, until Gooler mysteriously disappeared from the area, never to be heard from again by his partner. For 50 years, Gooler's gun stood as a silent sentinel in the desert, watching as the landscape slowly changed around it. Then came that fateful morning in 1917 when Rhoda Muncie, despite being 64 years old, mounted her cow pony with the same ease she'd shown in her youth. Together with her son Will, she rode out to check on their cattle in the crisp desert morning. As they rode along the eastern rim of the valley, beyond the dunes and mesquites that sprawled at the foot of the rise, they topped a low hill and drew rein. Suddenly, Will dismounted with a whoop of excitement. There, weathered by 50 years of desert sun and wind, stood Gooler's gun. The discovery caused quite a stir at the Lazy M Ranch, drawing visitors from all around to examine this piece of desert history. The gun was remarkably well preserved, its maker's mark still clearly visible. Spencer Repeating Rifle Company, Boston, padded March 618_0. The missing figure was almost certainly a 6, marking it as one of the rifles manufactured in 1860 for Union Army use. The gun told its own story of its 50 years in the desert. But there's more to this tale. According to Finley Bunn, who lived in a neat little cabin on Gooler Heights and was born in the Oak Creek country between Mojave and Tehachapi, Gooler might have returned to his lost bonanza after all. A handmade pick and half-rusted frying pan were found in the canyon, suggesting someone had worked the area in the 1860s. More intriguingly, Boone's uncle, Jack Curlitz, known throughout the region as Slate Range Jack, reported seeing Gooler several times in the 1870s while freighting for Remy Nadeau between Wilmington and the Modoc Mine. These sightings occurred near what would later become the Gooler Mining District, and once near Mesquite Springs, not far from the canyon that would eventually bear his name. The real gold rush in the area began in 1893, 26 years after Gooler's initial discovery. Two prospectors, Reed and Benson, found gold near the mouth of what became known as Gooler Canyon. When news spread, the area quickly filled with ambitious miners. Claims were staked throughout the main canyon and near its mouth by notable figures like C.F. Meckham, Frank Yeager, and a particularly successful miner known simply as Crumpy. Charlie Shellman also worked a claim there, and his cabin still stood in the canyon at the time this story was recorded. The geography of the canyon shaped its mining history. The spring where Gooler first found gold lay a mile and a half up the canyon, just above an area known as the Narrows. Various gulches branched off from the main canyon. Mormon Gulch to the left at the Narrows, Red Gulch on the right, and Colorado Gulch on the left further up. Below the Narrows, Slate Gulch opened on the east side and Sand Gulch on the west. Near the mouth of the canyon, Reed and Benson Gulches and Eagle Gulch all yielded rich deposits. The wealth that came from this district was staggering. Ed McGinnis, who later became Judge McGinnis of Randsburg, served as the Wells Fargo agent at nearby Garlock. He reported that $350,000 in gold passed through his office alone, and estimated that the total yield from the Gooler district exceeded $1 million. The stories of individual strikes paint a picture of the area's richness. In Reed Gulch, a nugget worth nearly $1,000 was found on Dynamite Miller's property, though ironically, it was found by someone leasing the claim, not by Miller himself. Happy Hogan struck it particularly lucky in Benson Gulch, finding a nugget that weighed 23 ounces. 4, 5, and 10-ounce nuggets were common enough to barely warrant mention. As for Gooler's gun, it found a fitting home in the collections of those who appreciated its historical significance. Will Muncie gave it to his friend Fred E. Borton, an attorney in Bakersfield, who later presented his entire gun collection to his son, Paul R. Borton of Bakersfield. Both Will and Rhoda Muncie have since passed on, with Rhoda living to the remarkable age of 97. Today, the spring where Gooler first knelt and discovered gold lies inactive, but its legacy lives on in the names and stories of the region. We'll never know exactly how much of the district's wealth was recovered by Gooler himself during his mysterious later visits, but the discovery of his gun in 1917, standing guard over the desert for half a century, confirms beyond doubt that he was the true discoverer of this million-dollar jackpot. This has been Southwest Desert. Join us next time for another extraordinary story from the Southwest. Welcome to Southwest Desert, where we explore the mysterious tales and forgotten treasures of the American Southwest. I'm your host, and today we're diving into an extraordinary story from the rugged Baboquivari Mountains of Arizona, a tale of Spanish gold, vampire bats, and a secretive Papago Native American who held the key to one of the Southwest's most intriguing lost mine and treasure. The Baboquivari Mountains rise dramatically from the Sonoran desert floor, their jagged peaks standing like ancient sentinels against the Arizona sky. Perhaps no story from these mountains is quite as captivating as the tale of the Lost Vampire Bat Mine. Picture yourself in the small Mexican town of Arivaca, Arizona, more than 150 years ago. The dusty streets are lined with adobe buildings, their mud brick walls baking in the relentless desert sun. Local prospectors, known as gambuchinos, work the creeks daily, their practiced hands panning for gold in the glittering streams that descend from the surrounding mountains. But our story centers around a peculiar figure who regularly appeared at the local trading post, an elderly Papago Indian who would ride into town on his pinto horse. The old man's appearance was always met with curious glances, for he carried something that would catch any prospector's eye: pure gold nuggets. Now, in those days, finding gold wasn't particularly unusual. The gambuchinos were regularly pulling an ounce or more of gold per day from Arivaca Creek. The sound of their sluice boxes and the sight of men bent over their gold pans was as common as the desert sunrise. But what made this old man's story fascinating was the consistency and mystery surrounding his wealth. Month after month, year after year, he would appear at the trading post, exchanging his gold nuggets for basic supplies and colorful calico fabric. The trading post itself was a hub of activity, a place where miners, ranchers, and local Native Americans would gather to trade goods and share stories. The merchant knew every regular customer by name, and the old Papago had become one of his most intriguing patrons. As time passed, the creek's gold started to run dry, as placer deposits often do. The gambuchinos' daily takes became smaller and smaller, forcing many to move on to other claims or abandon their dreams of striking it rich. Yet our mysterious Papago continued to arrive with his golden bounty, seemingly immune to the economic hardships that plagued other prospectors. This is where the intrigue began to build. The local prospectors, their own fortunes dwindling, couldn't help but notice that this Native American never seemed to work a mine. He lived a leisurely life, never missing a fiesta at the old pueblo of Tucson, always flush with money to spend. His family wanted for nothing, yet no one could figure out where his wealth came from. The mystery deepened when stories began circulating about the area's history. Luis Alvarado, an elderly Yaqui Indian who had spent his life in the Arivaca and Baboquivari region, became a valuable source of historical context. He spoke of old tales, stories passed down through generations, of a rich Spanish gold mine hidden somewhere in the Baboquivari foothills. These weren't just campfire stories. The evidence of Spanish presence was clearly visible throughout the region. The ruins of their houses still stood in the valley east of the mountains, their crumbling walls a testament to a colonial past that had once flourished here. Long rows of graves near the ancient foundation suggested a once thriving community, perhaps a mining settlement that had worked the mysterious source of gold that the old Papago now seemed to know about. The Spanish had been thorough in their search for precious metals, and they had left their mark on the landscape in more ways than one. Naturally, people began to speculate. Had the old Papago discovered a rich placer deposit somewhere in the countless arroyos that cut through the mountains? Or perhaps he'd found a Spanish cache of gold nuggets hidden away in some remote canyon near his humble brush hut. The local gambuchinos and even the trading post merchant tried everything they could to convince him to reveal his secret. Some offered partnerships, others attempted bribery, and a few even resorted to following him on his journeys home. But tracking the old man proved futile. Their efforts always led to the same place, his simple hut, with no sign of gold or mining activity. The old man seemed to live as simply as any other member of his tribe. Even when the old man moved his family to a new location on West Arivaca Creek, The gold kept coming. The trading post merchant had all but given up hope of ever learning the truth. But then came the day that would cement this story in Arizona legend, a day when the mystery would finally unravel, only to deepen again in an unexpected way. The old Papago arrived at the trading post as usual. He paid for his supplies with gold, but this time was different. There was something in his manner, a gravity that suggested more than just another trading visit. "I am an old man," he told the merchant, his voice carrying the weight of years, "and I will not be able to make use of them much longer." What followed was an extraordinary tale that began years earlier with a wounded deer and a chance discovery. The Native American described how he had been tracking the injured animal across the eastern slopes of the Baboquivari Mountains. He had stopped to rest atop a long ridge extending northeast from the peak, catching his breath in the thin mountain air. It was there that he witnessed something remarkable, a massive flight of unusually large, silver-colored vampire bats emerging from a nearby crevice. These weren't the common bats that one might see at twilight. These were spectacular creatures, their silver fur gleaming in the fading light, their size unlike anything the old man had ever encountered in all his years in the mountains. Intrigued by this unusual sight, he fashioned a torch from dry ocotillo bark and investigated the crevice. The flickering light revealed what appeared to be an old mine stope, a cavity where ore had been extracted so close to the surface that the roof had collapsed, creating a natural entrance. A draft suggested another opening, which he found several hundred feet down the mountainside, a tunnel entrance that had been concealed with mesquite poles and earth, now largely rotted away. After clearing the entrance, the Papago ventured inside with another torch. What he discovered was nothing short of extraordinary. About 100 feet into the tunnel, he found grinding stones, stacked against the wall, silent testimonies to the hard work of processing ore. Further inlay broken ore, old Spanish mining tools, and candlesticks of the type used by early Spanish miners. But the real treasure lay deeper within. In one of several large stopes, he found more broken ore and a Spanish shrine with a cross, a common sight in mines worked by Spanish and Mexican miners, who often sought divine protection in their dangerous underground work. However, it was what he discovered in a small cross-cut tunnel that would have made any prospector's heart stop. Piles of buckskin bags filled with gold nuggets, presumably recovered from placer operations elsewhere in the mountain. At the far end of this small tunnel, gold bars gleamed in the torchlight, their yellow surfaces unmarred by time. Some of the buckskin bags had deteriorated over time, spilling their golden contents onto the tunnel floor. The sight must have been breathtaking. Centuries of Spanish mining wealth, abandoned and forgotten, now revealed by chance to a lone hunter following a wounded deer. The old man explained that he had taken just one bag of the placer gold, believing the gods would not object to an elderly Indian taking such a small portion to feed his family. It was an act of remarkable restraint. Surrounded by immense wealth, he took only what he felt he needed. He buried this sack beneath the dirt floor of his house, and it was from this single bag that he had drawn all the gold he'd traded over the years. The merchant, excited by this revelation, couldn't wait to verify the tale. The old Native American gave him specific instructions. Climb the long ridge, and when evening comes, look for large silver-colored bats in the air. They would mark the location of the mine. It was a simple set of directions, but ones that would prove fatefully inadequate. The very next day, the merchant set out with his mozo, servant, their mules loaded with supplies for several days in the mountains. They arrived on the ridge by late afternoon, their animals tired from the steep climb. They spotted the bats circling overhead, just as the old man had described, and decided to wait until morning to begin their search, making camp under the stars. But as dawn broke, they received an unexpected visitor, the old Papago himself. He was clearly troubled, his usual calm demeanor replaced by visible anxiety. He explained that he deeply regretted sharing the secret of the mine, as it violated a sacred tribal law forbidding the disclosure of mine or treasure locations to outsiders. Fearing divine retribution, he had taken drastic action. "I waited until all the bats were back in the hole. Then I closed the entrance with rocks and earth," he told the merchant, his voice heavy with both regret and determination. "No more bats. They all will die in the hole, and no white man will ever find the mine." True to the old man's words, no vampire bats have been seen in the Baboquivari Mountains since that day. And despite countless searches over the years, no one has ever rediscovered the lost mine and treasure they once guarded. The silver-colored bats, if they ever existed, have become as legendary as the gold they once shared their home with. This tale, passed down through generations, joins the countless legends of lost mines in the American Southwest. But what sets it apart is its unique blend of elements: the mysterious vampire bats, the Spanish mining history, and the moral complexity of a man caught between helping others and respecting his tribal traditions. The Baboquivari Mountains still stand today, their rugged peaks holding who knows how many secrets. Somewhere among those slopes, behind a sealed entrance, perhaps there still lies a fortune in Spanish gold, guarded now only by the bones of those silver-colored bats who once called the mine their home. This has been Southwest Desert. Join us next time as we explore another mysterious tale from the American Southwest. Until then, keep exploring, and remember, every legend has its grain of truth. Welcome to Southwest Desert, where we uncover the fascinating stories of forgotten riches and mysterious locations of the Southwest that have captured imaginations for generations. I'm your host, and today, we're diving deep into one of the most intriguing tales of lost wealth in Utah Territory, the story of the Lost Santa Clara Mine, a rich silver and lead deposit that was discovered not once, but twice, only to be forever lost to the unpredictable forces of nature. Before we begin our tale, let's set the stage. The year was 1852, and the American West was in the grip of gold fever. The California gold rush was drawing thousands westward along various routes, including the old Spanish Trail through Utah Territory. This was a time of profound change and opportunity, when fortunes could be made or lost on a single discovery, and when the landscape itself was still wild and largely unmapped. Our story begins with a wagon train making its way through Utah Territory. The journey was far from peaceful. Local Native American tribes had been following the train for days, creating a constant state of tension among the travelers. They'd already lost several horses and cattle to raids, and the wagon train captain had ordered everyone to maintain a tight formation, especially while crossing the numerous creek beds that cut through their path. Among these travelers was Jim Hooden, a man whose chance discovery would spark a decades-long quest. Hooden was riding in the last wagon of the train as they approached the Santa Clara Creek, one of many water crossings they would make that day. The mood was tense, with the rear guard keeping a particularly watchful eye on the surrounding landscape. What happened next was a perfect storm of circumstance. The rear guard, increasingly nervous about the pursuing Indians, cracked his whip in the air to hurry along the last wagons. The sharp sound echoed across the creek bed, spooking the horses of the forward wagon. The startled animals veered off their intended path, and in that moment of chaos, destiny intervened. The wagon wheels scraped against a rocky ledge, and Jim Hooden, from his position in the last wagon, caught a flash of something unusual, a metallic gleam where the iron tire had scraped the rock clean. Despite the guard's angry protests and the potential danger from nearby Indians, Hooden knew this was a moment he couldn't ignore. He quickly broke off several chunks of the exposed rock and tossed them into his wagon. Before continuing on, He took careful note of his surroundings, creating a mental map that he hoped would lead him back to this spot. The location seemed straightforward enough. The vein was approximately 2 feet wide at the top, growing wider at the bottom and sloped toward the road. It was embedded in a rock ledge taller than a covered wagon, about 5 steps from the creek bed. To the left, a distinctive long level ridge stretched about half a mile from the river, rising 500 to 600 feet above the stream bed. These landmarks would prove crucial and ultimately insufficient in the years to come. Houghton continued on to California with his wagon train, those precious samples safely stowed away. When he finally had them assayed, the results confirmed what he'd hoped. The ore was extraordinarily rich in both lead and silver. But like many who arrived in California during the gold rush, Houghton found himself caught up in the frenzied search for gold. It would be several years before he could return to his discovery, years spent working for others who had struck it rich in the gold fields, slowly building up his own stake. When he finally made it back to the Santa Clara, the landmarks were exactly as he remembered them. This first return trip proved highly successful. He extracted a full load of ore and sold it for a handsome profit. Energized by his success, Houghton soon returned for a second load. But this time, nature presented a challenge. Spring runoff had raised the creek's water level, partially covering the silver seam. Undeterred, Houghton demonstrated the ingenuity that marked many successful prospectors of his era. He constructed a semicircular dam made of cedar boughs and sand, creating a dry workspace where he could access the increasingly rich vein of ore. What he found must have exceeded his expectations. The seam was wider than before, the metal more densely packed, and he had to dig below the sand level to fill his bags. But just as he finished loading his mules, fate intervened again, this time in the form of an approaching wagon. What happened next would prove to be a crucial moment in the mine's history. Houghton, perhaps driven by a prospector's natural secretiveness or possibly concerned about claim jumpers, made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. He quickly dismantled the dam, allowing the creek to wash sand over the silver vein. Then, rather than take the road as any normal traveler would, he led his loaded mules away across the sagebrush, avoiding all contact with the approaching wagon. But here's where the story takes a fascinating turn. The approaching wagon carried Robert Lloyd, his wife Eliza, and their baby. They were headed to Pine Valley for the summer, and what they witnessed that day would draw them into the mystery of the Santa Clara Mine. Imagine the scene from their perspective. A lone prospector hurriedly destroying what appeared to be a dam, then leading heavily laden mules away from the established road, behavior suspicious enough to make any traveler curious. Lloyd stopped to investigate, and what he found told a clear story. Wet boughs scattered about, a trail of damp sand leading to where the mules had been tied, and most tellingly, bits of ore still clinging to the rock face. Using a shovel from his wagon, Lloyd reconstructed the dam and uncovered what the mysterious prospector had tried to hide, a rich vein of silver and lead ore that seemed to grow wider as it went deeper. Eliza Lloyd, perhaps guided by a stronger moral compass than most in those gold-hungry days, spoke up. "We haven't any right to it," she told her husband. "Take the dam out again, and let's go." Robert Lloyd complied with his wife's wishes, but not before taking his own precautions to relocate the site. He climbed the overlooking ledge and built a cairn of boulders. Then, in a stroke of ingenuity that would later prove tantalizingly significant, he fashioned a unique marker by pulling down a willow branch, bending it into a loop the size of his hand, and securing it with a knot. But nature had plans that would render both Houghton's mental map and Lloyd's markers useless. 2 nights later, a massive cloudburst in the Pine Valley Mountains unleashed a torrent down the Santa Clara. The flood dramatically altered the landscape, uprooting trees, depositing vast banks of sand and gravel and completely changing the creek's course. When Houdin returned for what he hoped would be his third load of ore, he found the terrain so altered that he couldn't locate the mine. The flood had transformed the familiar landscape into something unrecognizable. Discouraged, he returned to California and eventually sailed for Australia, where he would spend many years, perhaps trying to forget about his lost bonanza. The Lloyds, unaware of Houdin's failed return attempt, were too busy with their farm work and baby to immediately return to the site. When they finally did make the journey that fall, they found the landscape transformed beyond recognition. Despite spending an entire day searching, they could find neither Lloyd's stone cairn nor his knotted willow marker. The story might have ended there, but fate had one more twist in store. Years later, in the 1870s, an extraordinary coincidence occurred in the small town of Pinto. Robert Lloyd noticed a stranger using a walking stick with a peculiar looped handle. The stranger explained he'd cut it along the Santa Clara after being thrown from his horse, an accident that had left him with a permanent limp. This chance encounter sparked a series of expeditions, with Lloyd and the stranger trying repeatedly to locate the crossing where the walking stick was found. But the landscape had changed too much. The Santa Clara's course had been permanently altered by that long-ago flood, and with it, the location of the rich silver vein was lost to time. In a final, remarkable twist, years later, the stranger with the walking stick actually met Jim Houdin, who had returned from Australia for one last attempt to locate his lost mine. The two men shared their stories and became friends, united by their connection to the elusive silver deposit that had shaped both their lives. Today, somewhere along the Santa Clara, that rich vein of silver and lead presumably still exists, buried beneath decades of sediment and changed landscape. The mine joins countless other lost deposits of the American West, its location preserved only in stories passed down through generations. What makes this story particularly compelling is its verification through multiple independent sources. 3 different men, Houdin, Lloyd, and the stranger with the walking stick, all encountered the same deposit at different times, each adding their own chapter to the tale. The ore samples were tested and proven rich in both silver and lead. Yet despite this documentation, despite the known approximate location, despite multiple searches by those who had seen it with their own eyes, the mine remains lost to this day. This has been Southwest Desert. I hope you enjoyed these lost Southwest tales. For more videos and playlists on the Southwest, check out my large catalog. Happy trails! Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more great content. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next video.